Well, hello and welcome to episode 95 of the Adoption Fostering Podcast with me, Scott Casson-Rennie, and him,
Al Coates.
I love how I sound all right until I go, and him.
And him.
And him. And him.
And him. Well, there you go. How the heck are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. How the heck are you?
I'm all right. Yeah, I think I'm all right. Do you know what? I'm slightly blurred. I don't know where I am anymore.
Is it Sunday? Every day's Sunday, isn't it?
I spent the whole week having this feeling of every day is a Friday. And maybe it's just this vain hope, and it's just I'm totally lost and perplexed. Totally perplexed. But such is lockdown life. How is it in lockdown in Ireland?
Wow. We're no longer in lockdown. We from Monday just gone, we are allowed to, well, I say we're not in lockdown, there's still restrictions, of course there is. Yes, we're just, we're all mixing, we're all going out to the pubs. Retailers are now reopening. They started reopening on Monday. We can now travel within our county, so there's no restriction as long as we stay in the county. And if we have to go outside the county, we're allowed to travel up to 20 kilometres outside of our own county.
It's a life of freedoms.
Yeah, it is. Yes,
You're a man. The shackles have been cast off.
Yeah, exactly. Middle son has now finished his quarantine, so he's free to roam. I don't know where he'll go, but
Put the bins out.
Exactly. So it's been an interesting time. It's interesting to see things like the traffic. Oh my God. I'd forgotten what it was like.
Oh, no. That's grim,
it's stuff like that. You just think, oh, goodness me. And things like a certain fast food chain that reopened as well this week are causing major kind of jam-ups in the town centre, as you can imagine, with the queues coming out of
gotta get your
onto
fix.
a big. Yeah, exactly. So but it's interesting to see people be getting out and about again.
Well, that's great news. Well, I think we've got this rolling news that we're slowly unravelling, and we're all allowed out and maybe to see one person. But I was thinking about some people, because I was conscious as I was thinking through Twitter of some families. I know there's a few adoptive parents that I know of that have single carers, single parents, who now in the UK we've just sort of announced that you can meet someone from another household and create sort of a lockdown bubble. You think for some people that's going to be that is going to be well overdue.
Godsend. Yeah, it is. But what I'm finding interesting, because I don't live there, I'm listening to the headlines, but I'm not really listening in detail. To us here, it just sounds like, well, lockdown's over in the UK. That's what it sounds like if you were just looking at headlines. So I find it really interesting to hear things like today with the bubble and all that sort of stuff.
Well, I think the media, the mass news media, I think that it's very hard to get a measure of what's going on. I think it's different place by place. I mean, I've literally not been to a shop since March the 21st, so I have no idea.
Which is perfect for you, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I've discovered online hat shopping, so my life is complete. Have you noticed my new hat? Anyway, enough of that.
Oh, it's very clean.
Yeah,
that's the wrong colour for you, Al.
Why?
Because it's like cream beige. Oh no, it's beige. It's your colour after all. Sorry, I forgot.
I think it's sand, maybe.
Sand. Oh, okay. Oh dear.
But also, the schools. It's kind of become clear that the schools are not going to open again until September, so that's good. And that kind of Peanut's giddy. She's literally she's forming a people's army. I think she's going to overthrow the state after her, because the ongoing adventures of Peanut. But she's very happy, and we're all very happy with that, really. Maybe we should kind of get stuck into banter at the end.
Yeah,
I'm conscious that we had a guest, and unfortunately you were called out somewhere, so you couldn't actually. Yeah, you had to.
And I was so looking forward to it as well after our last meeting with her, shall we say, where we grabbed her. I rugby tackled her into the
before she could get in a taxi, which is quite funny.
Yeah, exactly.
No, just come in this door. And so that's Louise Bomber. And she's written a fantastic new book. And so, I mean, we just got her on a book tour, basically, haven't we? I'd like to think that we're special. But
I'd like to think I was special as well, but my copy of the book hasn't arrived yet. So
we need to talk about your copy of the book.
Just saying. You've sold it, haven't you?
You might have to enter a competition to get your copy.
You've sold it, haven't you? You've sold my book, haven't you? Oh my God.
One has to supplement one's income in these times. No, I haven't sold it. Anyway, we talk about the
full
book.
price for it if you did.
Well, I don't know how much it is. It feels like a good £20 book.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I was going to say, I should think it is.
Yeah, $16.99 maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's terrible.
Guess the price of Louise Bomber's book, and you could win it.
Yeah, guess the price, guess the weight. Well, maybe we should do that. Guess the weight. So we've got one to give away. Maybe we should, or maybe just retweet. That's probably much more sensible. And it's a great book. It's called Know Me to Teach Me, and Louise is going to go through it. So shall we put the interview on, and then maybe we'll unpack some of the things that she says.
Smack it on there. Smack it on.
Well, hello, Louise, and it's fantastic to be speaking to you. But first of all, Scott sends huge apologies.
Oh, that's fine. Really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. And then when we spoke to you, we kind of collared you in a Scottish hotel, didn't we, back in December?
You did. Chased me down.
Yeah, that was a bit awkward. And you'd mentioned that you were writing a new book, and you promised very kindly to come on and talk to us about your new book. So do you want to kind of do a plug for your book and tell us, what is it, how is it, why is it, and what's it all about?
Wow. It's my new book. I'm really, really pleased that I've now got it in my hands. Know Me to Teach Me. And the subtitle is Differentiated Discipline for Those Recovering from Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's all about making the latest neuroscience practical. So rather than us all just saying, we know about the theory, really trying to get it into our hands so that we can do something with it, particularly in the school context. But I think it will also help families as well. I've written it with education in my mind, I suppose. And it's all about, I think, it's just trying to help people to understand how bodies and minds function best. Because we've kind of got things the wrong way around in education. Right. And I think that's where we've got stuck. So it's based a lot on Bruce Perry and Porges's work, but also other experts as well, and obviously my experience and families and everybody that I've ever worked with. I feel like it's kind of a combination of it all. In that book.
I mean, it's a big book. It's got it's one of those books that's heavy, which I like. When you get a heavy book, you feel like it's got good value. Can I kind of, before we get back to the book, can I ask about maybe a little biography of you, because I'm conscious that I think I saw you at an Adoption UK conference, and that might have been 2007, 2008, sometime. So that's a long time ago. So how did you sort of fall into this? What's your background and your story?
Yes, well, I was a primary school teacher to start with in East London, and that's where my curiosity in all of this kind of work began, I suppose. I felt like I'd been thrown in the deep end. I was with the Year 6 class, and they'd had many different teachers before me during their school year, so that didn't really help. Basically, I now realise that there were some children in that class who were traumatised.
Right.
I didn't at the time. I didn't really understand some of the behaviours that I kind of encountered. But as I got to know them all, one by one, I started to realise that some of them were really struggling with all kinds. And I spent a lot of time listening, a lot of time out of lessons, getting to know them, and just really curious about them and why they did what they did. So that's where my curiosity began, I suppose. And then I was there for a few years, and I always found, I suppose, the ones who are a little bit more challenging, let's say, the most interesting. So I built up relationships with those. And anyway, I went across overseas to work in Bolivia with street children for a year. And that's what really kind of then just like propelled me into all of this, because I came across children as young as 4 and 5 who it seemed as if they had just kind of given up on life. And I was just like, is this it? It kind of, even though I was in a completely different culture, I just thought it resonated with what I'd found in East London, I suppose. Some of the similar behaviours, and a lot of stories very similar in terms of neglect and abuse and domestic violence and all of that. And so I remember just thinking, is this it? is it a life sentence once you've experienced trauma? And I just determined then, while I was there, when I got back to the UK, I wanted to study mental health and find out about all of this, and is there a way through the wall, so to speak, because children that were quite young who seemed to have given up on life, basically. So when I came back, I wanted a job, obviously, as a teacher again, but I'd given up my work from before. So I joined a supply agency, ended up in a massive southeast secondary mainstream school, even though I was primary trained.
I mean, that sounds like mad. I mean, supply teacher is like, it's like raw meat to the wild animals, isn't it, in some extent?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. It was a bit like, it was a bit of a shock to the system, I have to say. But they really liked me, and they asked me to run their inclusion department, in terms of the EBD side, not the whole inclusion department, but the emotional behavioural part. And so before I knew it, I had a permanent contract as an individual support teacher. And as soon as I had that in my hand, I just thought, this is my moment to ask for some training. So basically, I just asked if I could go off and do some training around this whole area of mental health. And they were just like, okay, what do you want to do? So I did some research, and I just thought, well, these children deserve the best. So had a little look, and found the Tavistock Clinic in North London.
Yep.
And applied for a place. I think it would be unheard of now for a school to pay for this kind of thing, but they paid for me to go and do some training. I didn't have a life for a few years, and kind of like one training led to another training. Yeah. And I got hooked. From day one, I got hooked when I started hearing all about attachment and some of the unconscious communications that go on. And basically, trained and became a fully fledged therapist, but carried on working in this mainstream secondary school and integrated some of what I was finding, from my work into my place of work there with children who are really disaffected, who are on the edge of exclusion. And I just loved working with young people and trying to work out what was going on for them. I was more interested. I was kind of a bit of a phony as a teacher, to be honest, because I was more interested in that than I was in the curriculum. So the teachers liked me there because I would do that part, and they could be then freed up to get on with the teaching. And anyway, when I was a fully fledged therapist, I heard that there was a job in Brighton. And so I came along and didn't think I was going to get the job. I was really young compared to everybody else and least experienced of everybody else. But they chose me because of my enthusiasm and passion and my real interest around attachment. And it just so happened, it was to run a therapy service, by the way, for children excluded who are on the edge of exclusion in our city in Brighton. And just so happened that on my interview panel was Dr. Paul Holmes, who was a psychiatrist for children and a psychotherapist, who had just started in 1999 the Attachment Project. And it was kind of following Family Futures model. A lot of people probably have heard of it in London. And also inviting over people from the States to come and help us to think about all of that. And anyway, he spotted that I was interested in attachment and asked me to be part of that team as well as running a therapy service. So I joined the team, the youngest of the team, but really out of my depth, big time, alongside people who'd been, psychotherapists for years or whatever. And they asked me to be a therapist, and they wanted a specialist teacher hat. And so off I went, working with families for half a day or a day at a time, adopted families, foster families, family and friends, to try and support placement stability, to reduce exclusions, and to promote better mental health. And as a result,
just a couple of things, then, just a little, not much. Then, and
as a result of all of that, I was, as the only teacher on the team, they said, right, okay, can you go out and support our clients that have got coming to our project out in their schools? And I just thought there'd be some manual or something that I could read, thinking, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Looked around, and there wasn't anything for me to follow. I did some research. There was some work in the States around residentials, but not really what I needed for 30 plus children in a class. So I set up on a bit of a journey, I suppose, to try and integrate what I knew as a therapist and what I knew as a teacher might work. And to be honest, I didn't really feel like I was doing anything really revolutionary. I was just trying to get relationship back on the map, I suppose. And I would have loved to have gone in there and done training in all the different schools. But I didn't have that luxury, didn't have that time, because some of the children were literally on the edge of exclusion. And so I just needed to work with whoever was around. Quite often they were support teaching assistants or mentors. And so I just built up a good relationship with them. And I was just like, right, are you up for this? Right, we're going to just really overcompensate relationship. And, and on every level, you know, I had children who were 5, children who were 16. Whoever came to our project, I would have to go out and try and settle them in their schools. And over a few years, people started to sit up and just go, you know, what is this that you're doing? Because children who previously been up and about at their seats were now seated, and those who previously got stuck in their learning were now starting to make progress. And those who, you know, had previously been excluded seemed to be being included. And so I got asked to write up a book about it, and that's where Inside I'm Hurting came from.
Which is kind of a seminal work, isn't it? It's kind of this, it's on my bookshelf as there, which just reaches over and gets. Yeah. Got that. I think I probably bought that at the Adoption UK conference. Yeah, a long time ago. I mean, you've kind of condensed what sounds like a massive journey, a lot of hard work and a lot of learning, and I'm sure there's a lot of heartbreak in the midst of all that. But it seems like you can boil it down to this just different approach where you just looked at things differently. And was there opposition to that? Were people kind of going, well, no, that's not right? No,
not really. No, it was more people were quite intrigued, I think. And because I think they saw it working, it was more that they were curious. What are you actually doing? You know, and
what voodoo is this?
Yeah, what is it? What are you doing? And when I would say things like, you know, well, I'm smiling at the children and I'm spending time with them and giving them quality time, and you know, just really trying to understand how they see the world, because that's a lot of it that's what I was trying to do, was trying to see their perspective. Like, how did they view the classroom? How did they view the teacher that was over there, and that interaction? You know, I did a lot of observations. So I sat back and watched, and I learned so much just from watching. Honestly, it's just like the children themselves have taught me so much. I'd say they were my best tutors in all of this. And then obviously talking to them and asking them, you know, help me to understand all that, those kind of questions, you know. And I just started to realise there was a complete mismatch going on. You know, the adults seem to be looking at the world through another lens to what these children seem to be looking at. And the children, particularly the ones who I was really focused in on, you know, the adopted ones and the fostered ones who'd experienced trauma along the way, it was really clear that they had a very different lens on that just seemed to distort quite a lot. And they were literally watching their back the whole time, you know, hyper vigilant. And I just really felt compassion, I suppose, just thinking, gosh, there's this gap. You know, somebody needs to stand in the middle and kind of, you know, make a bridge of some kind. And so that's where I think I kind of came along and tried to form a bridge. I don't know whether I did a good enough job, but I have tried over the years to build that bridge so that people can actually walk across it and meet each other, actually properly meet each other. Not just think they know about what the children need, you know, but actually meet each other.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, it does feel like that the landscape has shifted significantly since. I remember, as I say, I remember hearing you speak and feeling like you were from another world. You know, this language that you were using. Well, in the sense that it was just, I'd not heard anything like this, and it just resonated, and it continues to resonate. This, what, on one level, just feels like common sense. It just, you know, it's got highfalutin language, but actually, even reading your book, you know, Know Me to Teach Me, by the book, often you're just going to go, well, yeah, of course. Is that too simple?
No, that's what I feel. I don't really feel like I'm saying anything that's like, you know, majorly profound. It's about like realising that we're human beings here. Do you know what I mean? And when certain things happen, of course, this is going to happen, you know. You know, I work with a lot of young people right now, because I'm still a practitioner, by the way, who basically feel like there's something flawed about them, that there's something wrong with them to their core because of things that have happened to them. And they're always like really taken aback when I explain to them that, oh my gosh, like your body and your mind were just doing what they were meant to do because you were experiencing high levels of stress, you know, like your job is a brilliant job of surviving, you know, and you know, and I love, Paul just has got a lovely saying, I've got it in the book, you know, your body used heroic defences in order to survive. And I just think that's really lovely to actually communicate that to somebody else, to help them to realise that. And as soon as you say that, you know, a lot of the young people I work with, the older ones particularly, will just be like, really? Gosh, you know, like, thank you for saying that, because I've never thought about it like that before. I've always thought there was something wrong with me, that there's something really, you know, maybe I've got, I don't know, some mental health disorder that nobody's discovered yet, you know, and all that kind of thing. And it's just like, no, it's just like your body and mind were doing a brilliant job of helping you to survive. You know, the problem is right now, it's just that you don't need that anymore because you're now safe. You know, you've now got a new family and you've got this and this. And it takes the body and the mind a long time to catch up with the reality of that. And that is just so revolutionary for some young people to find out, you know, and also for staff to find out, to understand what that mismatch is, you know, that they're not actually bad children. And sometimes people just think, you know, they're just here sent to challenge us, you know, they're challenging behaviour and they're disturbed behaviour. I've heard all kinds of things describing them.
Yeah.
And you think, oh my gosh, you know, they're little human beings and they're just doing their best to kind of live, you know, and the nervous system is trying the whole time to survive and to protect and to stay alive. Sometimes, you know, it's been a matter of survival, hasn't it? In some cases.
I mean, it's interesting in reading your book. It builds heavily on like you said, on Bruce Perry's work. But there's a chapter 3 where you talk about reframing discipline, and it's almost, the book feels like and everything that you talk about feels like this invitation to say, think again, think differently. And you talk about this idea that in fact you do invite us to think again, because you've got like a checklist of, you know, the behaviour consequence model, or kind of a more relational model. Do you think that that is a message that can get through? And I'm sort of thinking that in the context of I've heard more about zero tolerance in schools than the last 3 years than I've ever heard in schools. Is there a counter argument? Is there another move that's coming against this? Lots of questions there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think there is. Because, I just think now's the time to update. You know, like we seem to have been working within a very antiquated system, you know, that hasn't really taken any account of the latest neuroscience or the latest in child development or attachment. I mean, lots of people walk around saying, oh, yeah, I know all about attachment, but they haven't actually applied it. You know, it's kind of like it's just been an interesting, I don't know, like an interesting theory. It seems when I've talked to people, it's like their exclusion figures haven't changed and the practice hasn't changed and policy definitely hasn't changed in many places. And it's just like, to me, it's just like, well, if there's some new information and new research around we need to take on board, then surely lots of things need to change, you know? We need to update. And our children deserve this. For some reason, education's been left behind, and I don't really understand why. It seems that other agencies are a little bit further ahead, like, you know, but I think we've still got, as a whole community, a long way to go with this. But for some reason, education is even further behind, you know. I don't think it's helped, by the way, from the fact that we are over-evaluated left, right and centre, and we're working very traumatised systems. So it's very hard to retain your reflective capacity and to think differently and to think outside the box when you are being judged constantly. And we have massive classes, you know. It ends up being crowd control sometimes because our schools are so big and our classes are so big, and with one adult, you know, sometimes, and our support staff have been taken away, and, you know, with scarce resources, you can see why people are kind of panicking in a way. And I really believe that anxiety, high levels of anxiety, are behind zero tolerance. It's literally trying to survive. You know, it's a kind of like a trauma response. You know, I'm not saying I agree with it, but I'm just saying I think there's high levels of anxiety behind it all. And I think if we were to kind of go for that, if we were to go for the anxiety and the stress, if we actually looked at our systems and thought about how do we reduce stress, then I think that would actually release a lot, not only obviously for our children's benefit, but for the whole of the way that we do school. You know, because we haven't really thought about it. I think we only think really about stress when there's GCSEs around, you know, or SATs, for example. Yeah. But actually think about stress across the whole system and how it impacts us. You know, are we trauma inducing or are we trauma reducing by our systems and by how we are individually and how we respond to children? And who's looking after the grown-ups here? You know, who's making sure that, you know, stress stays at a minimum? You know, there's big implications, I think, once we really take this on board, or thinking about us being stress regulators rather than behaviour managers. To me, that's fundamental here, because I think that we've got our our whole lens is in the wrong place. We're just looking at behaviour, when actually maybe we need to be looking at the root, which is more to do with stress and what stress does to us as human beings, particularly toxic stress. If you've experienced those childhood experiences, it's a whole other level. It's not just like, I'm feeling a bit stressed. It's, actually impacts our physical health, well-being, our bodies, our minds, on every level, our learning, being able to even think or speak or hear. That was fascinating when I got into the polyvagal theory of Stephen Porges' work. And I just suddenly thought, my gosh, how many teachers have said, look at me when I'm speaking to you, or listen to me. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's so linked to felt safety. It's all interconnected with attachment. We need to feel safe with one another in order to be able to even use our middle ear muscles to be able to tune into human voice.
So explain that a bit more then, because you've kind of you talk a lot about it in the book, but when you talk about polyvagal theory and teachers saying, look at me, listen to me, hear me, unpack that for me a bit.
Well, it's hard to do it in proper detail. I think the book does it more justice, obviously, but basically there's a vagal nerve that we've got, all of us, and it's all connected to our nervous systems. And basically, it's so linked. Which nervous system we are in at any given point is so linked to our sense of felt safety. So what we feel inside, not necessarily outside, but obviously that does play into it.
Yeah.
Because Paul talks about us all having an unconscious threat detector inside of us from birth, which is constantly assessing on an unconscious level our environment, each other, and that little assessor, that threat detector that's going on the whole time, influences how we relate and which nervous system we're in. And if we go into fight flight, if we sense any kind of like threat or danger, or worse, like threatening, then we move into fight flight responses. And as soon as we move into that, it basically just changes the whole way that we feel, touch, taste, hear. On every level, all our senses are connected. The vagus is actually called the wandering nerve because it's so long, it actually impacts so many different parts of our body. To me, that was just revolutionary to find out that actually your middle ear muscles only kind of get activated and can tune into human voice when you are in your social engagement system, and which is when you are feeling safe, when you're feeling calm, when you're in a state of alert. And it's all linked to safety. So as soon as you start feeling threat, you tune into high frequencies or low frequencies, like high pitch or low pitch, rather than middle tone, which is human voice. So to me, that was really fascinating, thinking of how many children just can't actually hear us, when they're flooded. So,
And I often talk to teachers and my experience as a parent as well, because I think this book is this is a book that's going to be consumed by a lot of parents of children who've experienced adversity. But how many times I've had a conversation that's been quite heated and a child has sort of said, you didn't say that. And I was going, no, I did say that. And I kind of, and then it stops being about the thing. It becomes about my sense of, you didn't hear me. You as a child, you need to hear me. And then, so the issue is not the issue. And that's gone. That's we're past, and we're into that idea of that rule-based. I am the parent. I have control, and I am in charge, or I am the teacher. You need to listen to me. You have shown me disrespect. Now there is a consequence because you have disrespected me. Yada yada yada. And by then that ship has sailed, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, also, we've got two nervous systems meeting each other in completely different nervous systems, if you know what I mean. So there's a massive mismatch. This isn't just about attachment styles. This is about, I'm in a different state to you. And so I'm talking to you, but you can't actually hear me. And you can't actually remember and you can't process because you're feeling threatened by me. So we don't even realise, I don't think, as teachers, how many threat cues might be going on. And so I'm working very closely with staff to help them to learn about felt safety cues, how you can kind of override that threat cue. Because, for example, many teachers, particularly in secondary, well, not many teachers, some teachers in secondary have what I call a thinking face, or somebody else might say a neutral face or a still face. And all, it's just fascinating for me to see some of the children that I work with, how they respond to those teachers, as opposed to the ones who are animated and playful and vary their tone of voice, and change their face quite a lot. they're eating out of their hands, but these ones that are, still-faced, they can end up just going straight into overwhelm and trashing classrooms and ripping up their work and all this kind of thing. And I'm just like, gosh, an easy win here is to smile, just to move your face. And, there's just a lot that we need to learn about, in terms of how we can influence one another and help each other to feel safe. Because sometimes people just aren't aware of what's going on in their body language. They're not even aware about their face, and how important it is,
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I think that we don't want to be down on teachers. That's no in the world we're not down on teachers, but we do understand that actually their job is probably much more complicated than we want.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So then, when we look at things like zero tolerance policy, the wagons are circled. That teacher then feels safe. Then I've got absolute certainty. Whereas in your book you talk in that discipline chapter you talk about that's a whole different set of skills, isn't it? You can't just look at your list and go, you have broken a rule. You have to then interpret behaviour. You have to interpret the environment. You're asking an awful lot more of a teacher, especially for those children that are vulnerable. Yeah. Is that fair?
Well, we're going to need, obviously, I feel a lot of compassion for teachers because I feel like they're working in traumatised systems. And, I'm not surprised. There's some of the things that are going on at the moment. I think we need to redo how we do school completely, including like what we teach and teacher training and, what is available to teachers and the support that they need as well. I mean, I'd love to have a clinical supervisor in every school looking out for staff's wellbeing, checking in with them, being their key adult, that kind of thing, because I believe that we can pass it on if we have this happening to us. So there's a direct correlation, I think, between staff care and caregiving capacity, and
that's fascinating.
That's at the moment.
Well, I was asked to go to a school once, and the school was an SEMH school, so special educational needs and mental health, and the head teacher asked me to talk about reflective practice. And I thought, well, that's peculiar, and I started to look at it, and actually it was we had a fantastic session, because they said we get supervision once a term, and you go, the nature of this work is it's highly emotive, especially in that school, and no one was sitting down going, how are you doing? That must have been really hard when that kid called you a effing whatever, or were you frightened when that child kind of just started to display behaviour? So I actually said this idea of traumatised systems. I mean, that sounds like a great tagline, but do you actually, is that something that do you really believe that it's a system that is traumatising teachers?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's not. It's like how can we truly care and be attuned to and be reflective about children if no one's doing that for the adults, in the system, so to speak. If people are just giving them more and more and more and more to do, with hardly any time and just all this pressure the whole time. And we've actually got teachers that are watching their backs constantly and feeling like they're being judged. We all know that evaluation disables and acceptance enables, and yet that isn't really going on. It's not kind of like, oh, wow, what an amazing job you've done. Like, you've got 30 plus children in your class and you've managed to pull this off. There's not much of that going on unless you're with a very nurturing, obviously some of the heads and the senior managers are like that, obviously, but in the bigger structure I'm talking about, there's not really that going on. It's more kind of like, why have you not got these results? No kind of, not as much emphasis on, wow, you've been working in such a deprived area where there is so much hardship, and but you've managed to do this and this. Wow, that is amazing. Like, look what John can do now. Look what Sean can do now. They can actually focus for, half an hour. When they first came, it was like a minute. All of that. When you've really like bust a guts, to be alongside children who are hurting, I just think, gosh, it must be just so hard, to be that person that is working all hours and not hearing that, but it's not just that. It's the fact that we've got 30 plus children with all their different needs, and there are many complex dynamics in the mix. When you're a therapist, you learn all about all the different unconscious communications going on, and you're like, oh my gosh, 30 plus are all going on in the room.
Yeah.
So of course you're going to need to untangle that, and we're going to have all kinds of feelings, projected into us as the adults. I mean, parents know what that feels like. You end up feeling your children's feelings as well as your own, and it's just it can just get really confusing sometimes. What belongs to me? What belongs to them? What belongs to the past? What belongs to now? And all of that. And so somebody to help unpick that, I think, is really important in our schools. Because there is a lot more trauma than I think we realise as well going on in our neighbourhoods, in our communities, and our children are coming into school with that, and that has a lot of implications for how they see themselves, how they see others, how they interpret context they come into, and you'll see in the book I've kind of like been bold enough to say, I suppose, I wonder whether their felt safety and their lack of felt safety has a lot to do with being excluded, for example. And my guess is it probably has, that they are seeing threats where there aren't necessarily threats, but they are experiencing it as a threat because of their limited window of stress tolerance,
Yeah.
And so we go round in a cycle and it gets worse. It exacerbates the whole situation because we then increase our threats because we think we've got to bring in our control, because we can see this behaviour we don't experience it as distressed behaviour, we experience it as behaviour that needs to stop, and we just need to control it and get rid of it. Whereas really we need to understand it, we need to translate it, we need to realise that there's a reason why they're doing this. This behaviour is communication,
which is a greedy. It's a well-worn phrase, isn't it? That behaviour is communication. But actually, when people start to grasp that idea that it's a strategy to a child who's displaying whatever, it's a strategy perhaps for them to keep themselves safe. It's a strategy. And once people start to understand that, then they're not threatened by it. No.
Yeah, I don't think it's even conscious, to be honest. I think it's unconscious. I think it's literally a megaphone for expression. They don't necessarily have the words yet. They don't have all the experiences yet to do it in a more dignified and more kind of, sophisticated way. And so I think as the grown-ups, we have to try and translate that and just think, what might this child be trying to say to me if they had the words? If they had the words, what would they be saying? Or where are they in their nervous system right now? What state are they in? What might they need? Because as we learn more about the nervous systems and the states, we then start to realise there are certain things we can do at different states and in different nervous systems, which you wouldn't necessarily do if they were in another nervous system. So the more we learn our children and what they're actually trying to communicate to us, the better. So when I go into classrooms, I'm always saying to the support staff I work with, what state is your child in? Which part of the nervous system are they in? You need to know that first of all, because how can you put in the right kind of interventions if you don't know that? If you're just seeing a one-size-fits-all, because that would be really simplifying us as human beings. We're not like that. We're complex as human beings, aren't we?
Yes, there's an awful lot of complexity going on. And it is, the message in the book, but the message generally, as I said, I think a lot of parents will be, snapping this book up and then sort of kind of picking it up. It's a good heavy book. They'll go, right, I'm going to go and thrash a teacher with it. No, I hope not as well. But I think that teachers probably kind of get themselves in a position where a lot of parents come and say, you need to know about my son or my daughter, and could you please just read this book? And there's a fair chance that poor teachers given a 300-page book are going to we're perhaps adding to the challenge. So have you got effective tips for parents and carers to communicate with schools to try and get them on board with this different way of thinking?
I always think we need to have a PACE approach, which you'll see is written about in the book. So it's part of DDP, playfulness, acceptance, curiosity and empathy. So I don't think it's just children that need that. I think adults need that too. I feel like I'm kind of embody PACE as much as I possibly can in all kinds of contexts. And I think our first port of call is just to kind of really show understanding and just like, gosh, this must be really hard, or, just empathy particularly. I feel like that kind of like paves the way rather than going straight in and like, this is what I need you to do. Because in a way we need to do what's on the front of the book, which is the order of things, which, kind of helping to regulate and relate before we get into the the cognition, which is like, I need to read the book, or you need to know this about my child, there's an order to this. There's a sequence of engagement that Bruce Perry advocates, the 3 R's, but I've added in a 4th, as you can see, repair. And I think that's our first starting point, is to communicate, like, oh my gosh, it must be really hard having a class of 30 plus, and just showing some kind of human kindness. That's the first protocol, I think. And then secondly, it's just to try and open up a conversation about stress, which will be quite easy to do, I think, because stress is a shared language. We all know what stress is. We don't necessarily have the same amount of stress, each of us, and we don't always interpret it differently or manage it the same. But I do think stress is the shared language that we can have a conversation about, and talking about, I think my child has experienced toxic stress, and have you heard about the latest around toxic stress and what that does to bodies and minds? And have you heard that there's ways that we can actually bring the impact of that down? I think trying to engage their curiosity, because a lot of people out there are curious about things. They just want to know where to be signposted, I suppose. And there's quite a few good courses out there, including ours at Touchbase, little plug, around all of this. We run a brilliant course called Respecting Biology, where we actually take staff on an experiential journey through their nervous system, so they can actually try things out and see what it feels like for themselves, how they feel in their skin after they've done certain bits and bobs, so that they can then pass it on. It has to start with us. We as the adults need to know what this feels like, and what is this, which part of the nervous system am I in right now, which state am I in, and then what do I do to shift states, sensations and feelings, so that we can then do that with the children. If we're not very aware ourselves, how on earth can we be lead regulators in all of this? So I think it's kind of like just engaging curiosity, after starting with empathy, communicating acceptance, to try and just saying, have you heard that this has been going on in another school? I mean, you'll see in my book there's lots of evidence of different people all around the country who've been trying this out. Many of them are our attachment leads who've done a 7-day intensive course over a year. And they're now, and they have to do a case study, by the way, as part of that work to show the difference that it makes doing all of this. So they've got like real brilliant examples in there. So you could even say, have you heard about this school that is in wherever, doing this and this, and the impact that it's made? So I think people sit up and listen when they know it's going on somewhere else. To me, that would be the way in. It's just like where the evidence is, to be honest. Mm-hmm. How interesting is that? Just put it out there.
Are you optimistic for the future? I mean, you've probably seen quite a lot of changes. A government comes, a new minister, a new emphasis, a new curriculum, a new book. Do you see things, even though there's other things changing? Do you think that we're moving generally in the right direction?
Well, I think we've had a bit of a shock to our systems with what's been going on recently with COVID-19.
Of course,
and obviously I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but this, as Martin Luther King said, the words crisis and opportunity go hand in hand. And I actually think this is probably going to help us to really start thinking in a trauma responsive way, because before we were trying to kind of go, come on, we need to do this for our adopted children, our foster children, those who've experienced adverse childhood experiences. We've been trying to, wave the banner. But now it's actually this kind of practice is going to help everybody. It's going to be like, we're going to need to move into collective recovery together after a result of this collective trauma that we've been living.
Yeah.
And so I think actually this might propel new policy, new practice. I'm very, I suppose excited is not the right word right now. I'm hopeful and expectant. This will bring a whole new way of thinking about school. It has to. And in a way, we're being forced to think differently already, because we're having to meet in smaller groups. And many of our children and young people have enjoyed being at home or being taught in smaller groups.
Yeah.
And so even that is like learning, isn't it? Like for all of us about, well, maybe we need to think about that a little bit more in terms of class sizes and how we do school,
Yeah, I mean, I've got I work in fostering, and I've got a young man whose foster care is has kept not a strict, it's maybe too strong, but a very clear regime during the day. And the school have sent work, and the young person has done work at home, and their grades have just skyrocketed. because
Wow.
and the carer sort of said, well, I'm not an educator, I can't set the work, I can't do home education, but if you give me the raw materials, I can get them to do it. And so this young person, his sense of safety, his sense of stability, the distractions are not there, and he's taken this opportunity and that's an anecdote, but I'm hearing quite a lot of similar stories about young people. So,
well, relational buffering reduces stress. And many of our young people were really stressed when they were at school in the way we used to do school before COVID-19. And so, take that away and they flourish. So big lessons for us,
It's exciting, isn't it? That I mean, like you say, you wouldn't wish this on anyone. However, maybe something.
It's opening up a learning opportunity, I think, for all of us. We can't go back to doing school the same, it's got to be different, and we're going to be forced into doing it differently because of, I think, the length that this is going to go on. So we're going to have to rethink everything anyway. And interestingly, schools that are now, unfortunately, the people right at the top are not doing this at the moment, but schools and all our senior leaders and head teachers are turning to trauma therapists, to trauma experts, to therapists, counsellors, anyone who's leading on mental health. They are turning to them for advice and for, a frame to understand all of this and to move forward. And how do I make my decisions in a way that will support our children not to be traumatised and not to become re-traumatised as a result of COVID-19, which to me is so encouraging. I mean, local authorities are buying in my webinars, for example, and getting all the education staff, all the schools to listen in. There's been a big demand, and I think other trauma experts in this field will say the same. So that is really encouraging. It's like people are realising, that we are in a time that we have got to think differently, We've got to support people. We've got adults and children who are highly anxious right now. What do we do with this fear that's around? How do we dampen that? How do we support each other? Well, actually, Stephen Porges has said that what we need to be doing to increase felt safety right now is connection, that is what's going to help us, not the absence of threat. Connection is what will help us to feel safe in here with one another, regardless of what's going on outside of us, and that's going to be what will see us through. So we've got to really work at that, and learn what that is.
I mean, that's for a lot of people, that's music to our ears. We know that's something that we've probably been dancing around, and we're going, right now is the moment. And for a lot of people, that'll be new. And that's exciting, isn't it? Because the first time they are engaging that ear to listen, that it feels like you say, it could be a moment of opportunity that if we grasp well, they'll never be able to turn it back to zero tolerance.
No,
it's encouraging.
That's got to change.
Yeah. We did have one question about supporting children back into school. Have you got any sort of practical tips as children move back in? One adoptive parent sort of sent in a question. I mean, that's a big question, isn't it? You need a bit more meat on the bone. So thinking about a child maybe in primary school child who's maybe a little bit anxious, what can you think of some practical stuff, or is it just that relational stuff?
A lot of it, the biggest thing we can do is increase familiarity at school. So we need to obviously have good homeschool liaison and make sure that they're going to be able to have access to familiar spaces and familiar adults, particularly if they have experienced trauma, which adopted children and foster children usually have. And if they can't provide that, I would actually really seriously think about keeping them at home for now, at the moment, not forever, but familiarity will decrease anxiety. So I've been encouraging education staff to think about their children with high needs, for example, and to kind of really think about those ones, particularly having a familiar adult, familiar space. And if they can't provide that, to really think again, I suppose, as to whether they can actually support at this time. But also thinking about our children from the home point of view, a lot of them will have separation anxiety more than before because of having had this intense time at home. Yeah. So we're going to have to really think about transitional objects, And if we can't take objects in, as in, you know, like, oh, look at this, I've got this from home at the moment because of the restrictions, thinking about, you know, using smell, so sprays on wrists and on collars, for example, stitching things in, or having friendship bracelets, having things that you can swap between you with whatever age of the child. And even somebody was talking about like drawing, you know, the heart on the hand and sort of, you know, touching each other, and even setting up voice messages for each other during the day. So being allowed to phone home, I think, to check in with each other, and also just thinking about staggering transitions. I don't have to go in all day, you know, every day.
Yeah.
It could just be, you know, a check-in. It could be half an hour, and then build up slowly and gradually. In fact, the slower we go, the better. That's what I've been encouraging schools to think about, really staggering everything.
It's a bit odd, isn't it? Because it feels like there's a... Sorry, I was going to say that it feels like there's been a shift in power where parents have sort of been given more power than they've had in a long time, in the sense that parents are much... Whereas a year ago, if you'd said, oh, my child's anxious, people would have gone, all right, yeah, but they still need to be school tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Whereas today, if you said, my child's anxious, people are listening and probably paying much more attention, which feels different again.
Yes. And that's the way it should be, isn't it? You know, because
Absolutely,
you start forcing something. If they're anxious, you know, you're just going to make them worse. You know, I mean, I've got young people that I'm working with who can't even go out the front doors to exercise yet. Never mind be expecting them to go to school. So I think we need to remember that everyone's in the same storm, but we're all in different boats, and so we need to really kind of be kind to one another and kind of like listen and learn about each person's individual context. You know, because some just won't be able to. They won't be ready yet. And that's okay. I don't want to pressure them. And I think we need to be encouraging families to not pressure, to literally just really keep focusing on regulation and relationship needs for this season at the moment, you know. And even if they don't get very much learning done as well, I think that's okay. It's like to take the pressure off and to think, you know what, we just need to make sure that we come out of this intact as a family. Yeah. You know, relationships need to be protected at all costs. Let's not let COVID-19 kind of get in the way of any of our relationships. So I'm trying to encourage education staff to take the pressure off, I suppose, because I have heard of kind of like reams being sent back, you know, and everyone having a nightmare, because it could also go the other way. Conflicts at home because of all the learning tasks and not being able to get it done. And it's just like, do you know what? Let's just take the pressure off. We just need to make sure that our children are grounded and they're connected, and that we are as well, you know, so that we come out of this well, basically.
And that dynamic of parents who are stressed and anxious because they've got to get through this schoolwork with their child, it's a catastrophe waiting to happen, isn't it? It's this downward spiral of dysregulation.
Yeah. We have got to remain grounded and connected ourselves. And all my webinars, I've talked about putting our emotional oxygen masks on first, the grown-ups. So when I've been talking to parents or I've been talking to education staff, it's like, we need to attend to our own regulation and relationship needs first before we put the oxygen mask on our children. It's really, really important. They are watching and they're picking up on atmospheres. And remember that we can download calm or panic into our children really easily. So it's really important that we work on that. We're going to get it time.
I'm slightly concerned about what I've downloaded at my children. Now I'm going to have to go and have a think about that. No, we've taken it quite a... my 14-year-old, I've said, well, it's really, this is all on you. I'm not going to pressure you. I'll be here to help you, but you need to do what you need to do. So she's doing what she needs to do. But my 8-year-old is just loving it, which is terrible because she's pottering on and baking and making things out of wood. And anyway, there's this ongoing theme of where she's laying astroturf in the garden, but that's her peculiarities. But she's really happy. That's really important.
Yeah.
Anyway, mine for my children. Louise, you've given me so much of your time, and I really appreciate it. And I think that your message is kind of it rings. It resonates for this time. It's resonated for a long time, but ever so much more now. So thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you were hoping I would ask you? So you've got something like a prepared answer.
No, you did a brilliant job. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming on, and we shall what we do, we've got a copy of your book, which we're going to give away. So we'll get people to retweet and kind of will hopefully that'll go out to someone. I'll have to go to a post office, so that's got my anxiety going up. I'll maybe send one of the kids. Is that inappropriate? Probably. No, we'll work it out. We'll find a way.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you've had the chance to listen to that interview, and I know that you diligently listened to all of the interviews all the way through.
I do, every single one that you do, Al. I take great interest and hours out of my day to listen to all your interviews that you do.
You hang on every word, don't you?
I do, yes, I do.
Literally.
Yeah. I do find it interesting listening when I'm not involved and just how much you interrupt people. It's quite fascinating, actually. It says quite a lot about you. It's a social worker in you. Rewind, interject. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, it's my job.
I know. But, I just find it interesting. I do find it interesting that you do that because I notice it when I'm not involved. But actually, when we're doing a kind of three-way conversation on here, it's a little bit different.
So we've turned this into my annual appraisal.
No. I'm just saying that you do interrupt. That's all. Anyone would think you're a journalist, never mind social worker. Anyway, she was in fine form, let's say that.
Can we return to that conversation?
Yeah.
At the end, after when we turned it off, can we have that conversation at the end?
Have I hurt your feelings, Dan? Obviously.
No, I'm fine.
Oh, why have you got a tissue box in your hand?
Anyway, sensible heads. The interview, I think we were talking about it before, and you said there's a lot of that stuff that to our ears feels quite... We're familiar with a lot of it.
Yeah.
But I think that her passion really comes through, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, yeah. And her knowledge as well. I mean, yes, when we met her before, I was quite surprised at just how connected I felt to her, if that makes sense. I think we were a little bit starstruck that we actually had a microphone shoved in her face. But she's passionate, but just the knowledge, it just seems like her head is full of all this stuff that, if everybody, I'm not saying everybody had this knowledge in their head, but, she wants to share because she feels the need. Yeah. But if even half a dozen people were, learning from her in this book, then, it'll get passed on and stuff. But
she's held in such high esteem, isn't she? And I think that came through the reasons why. But she's it's the questions before the questions. So she was raising. She threw this comment about a traumatizing system for staff, and you kind of go, actually, this idea that that staff who are dealing with really complicated children in complicated situations, but then getting no sort of supervision that's focused on the needs of children or the impact of challenging behaviour. It's just, have you done your work?
And let's think about it. LSAs and teaching assistants are the ones that are probably dealing more directly with these children, especially in primary school, maybe not so much in high school, not depending on what their kind of support is. But they're the least trained. They're doing these jobs because they want to help children and they want to work in a school or they want to support children who've got learning difficulties or whatever it is they want to do, but they're actually the least trained. And if you've got a teacher then that kind of is unsupported, where does the LSA or the TA go for that support that they need to be able to work on strategies and things to help the child? And that's when maybe when it becomes more about the child's behaviour than anything else, because actually there's not that training there for those people to be able to.
That's one of the things we've discovered from the virus, isn't it? That actually the people who are doing some of that most critical work that's so critical in relationally is often the least rewarded or the least esteemed in society. I had a friend who was he was a police motorcycle outrider. And he'd done that as a day job all of his adult life, and then he got into his early 50s, retired and went to be a teaching assistant because he wanted to work with children. He said, I don't want to be a teacher, I don't want to be filling in forms, I want to actually work with children. Great guy. Played harmonica in a band I was in. Anyway, that's another story.
That's nice.
He was very good. No, he was good. The band was called the Outside Netties, but you'll know, if you...
Anyway, no, funnily enough, never heard of them.
Have you not? No. We were a very...
And I'm going to assume they were a folk band or something like that. Right.
No, we were much more than that. Have you heard of
really?
Elvis? Have you ever heard of my Elvis impression? Anyway,
no.
We're way off point.
Yeah, please don't.
The other thing that I think was quite... I think there was lots of things, but even just her talking about coming out of lockdown, which is, obviously today it's been announced that in the UK anyway, that it's going to be, well, in England, sorry, it's going to likely be for all primary schools, it's going to be September, which feels appropriate. It feels like a realistic goal.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like the clock is ticking to get children ready, but also in the middle of all that to get staff ready, to kind of start of like all of a sudden trauma is it's a buzzword, and so there's this opportunity to maybe make school different. And I was talking to another friend today who's got a child not dissimilar to our children, an adopted person. Oh no, she's an adopter and the children are adopted. I'm saying that actually her child is thriving in this environment. The school are sending work to home. All the parents have to do is kind of just encourage and monitor that. So it's not homeschooling in the sense that, because homeschooling I think is, I just couldn't engage with that because I'm not a teacher. I have no idea what the curriculum is.
I haven't got the patience either.
Yeah, but it's just not it's just not in my skill set. But if you give my child work to do, that potentially is a really safe place. So the idea of this third way coming through seems really interesting. I think it's a fantastic book. I think it's a great book, and I would really recommend it. There's a lot of the stuff in there about polyvagal theory, and I'm not here to sell a book because I had that conversation. If I was going to get any commission, she was straight and very tight-lipped about that. Funny that. But I just think that now is the time where is this an opportunity for our community? To take
for schools generally. Schools generally, I mean, they're going to have to change, aren't they? It's funny because this is a change that nobody expected, that nobody could have foreseen, and actually we're having to see these changes in school. Very similar. I'll give you an example. Obviously, haven't been to a shopping centre for months, and on Monday when I was absent from the interview with Louise, obviously I was taking Tristan to the A&E, but because I couldn't go into the hospital, I decided to go to the shopping centre, which I go to many times, and there's even there's arrows, you're only allowed to walk on the left, and exit here and blah blah, and that's what schools potentially are going to look like. Although it might be a little bit kind of softer and friendlier, we hope, than a shopping centre with big yellow and black kind of stripes everywhere.
Big hazard.
But these changes are almost compulsory, because we don't know where this pandemic will end, and so is this an opportunity to change, like you say? But the other point of it as well, and this is going way off topic in terms of Louise, but our schools have been overcrowded for so long that to have smaller class sizes would be impossible, and we don't have enough teachers either. So it's kind of, how long will this last? How long will smaller class sizes be, or half days, or however it's going to work, depend on the school, I guess, and the local authority.
I mean, Louise said that, and she talked. I think very briefly she mentioned class sizes, but saying how possible is it to kind of have a responsive and caring, nurturing environment when there's that many children, because it does ultimately just become down to crowd management. Yeah,
exactly. And we do have a very kind of old-fashioned education system anyway, don't we? I mean, we now understand a lot more about young people and children and their development needs. So, sitting on a chair at a table, what percentage of children actually thrive on that? I'd say not as many as, I would probably say at least half wouldn't thrive on that.
Yeah.
And, and yet we still we still chastise them for being wriggling or standing up or not being able to sit properly, or all that sort of stuff, and that's kind of a bit unfair for 2020.
Yeah, I mean, there was a school near us that I think it probably got in the headlines. It was maybe 3 or 4 years, probably longer than that, but they started for their teenagers of a certain age. I think it was the GCSE years. They said that they're going to run the school lessons 10 a.m. to I think 4, just because saying that actually the science says that teenage brains want to be asleep in the mornings. As it turned out, they did a terrible. They got a terrible Ofsted, and
Really?
and I think it was totally unrelated to the timings, and I think it was just coincidental. But actually, everyone was going, well, that's because you let them all come in at 10 o'clock. That's why the children have turned into whatever they turned into. So that's interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
But I think that flexible approach to school.
Exactly. Yeah.
That actually, when we were kids, probably there was more flexibility, but it just looked a bit more like neglect.
And abuse.
Well, yeah.
Well, I remember getting the ruler. I remember the ruler going over my knuckles.
I remember Mr. I'll not say his name, but he. We were in I loved metalwork, and he heated up something with a file, and he put it on the back of my hand, and I had a blister the size of a 10-pence piece.
Oh.
And you just think,
lads,
that would be the end of his career. But I just took it as a laugh, and I took no offence at it at all. It was just what it was. I mean, this is a class where we were setting fire to each other's aprons for fun. So
exactly. Yeah, I can imagine. I bet you were in the right rowdy lot, honestly.
No, I was the head boy at school.
What was it? A Borstal?
It was a very small pool of boys in the school.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
No, I was the head boy.
Oh, okay.
That's a conversation. Really.
That's a shocker. That's a shocker.
Were you not expecting that?
No, I wasn't. No,
I was the head boy.
I was what they called the class clown.
Really?
You won't be surprised to hear that. Yeah. And
I am actually, because you're not even slightly funny.
No. Every school report. Scott would do better if he stopped trying to make everybody laugh. Scott could do better if he did this, if he did that. Yeah.
Podcast would be better if Scott would stop trying to make people laugh.
Yeah, there you go. Put that in my next review.
I will. The only other thing I was wanting to mention, because we've probably used up loads of time, is that we were talking a couple of weeks ago about the government statutory instrument 445 that removed and weakened some of the legal protections. That was debated in Parliament today, and
it was.
It was put to the vote that it was to be reviewed, but actually it lost.
Yeah, which I find horrifying, actually, because obviously I don't know the details of the voting. However, I've seen some of the extracts of kind of snippets from Twitter and all that sort of stuff, and there's people abstaining from it, and
just not voting.
Yeah, I know that's what abstaining means, isn't it?
Oh, sorry. You're right. Yeah, it is.
Same thing, isn't it? Yeah, and I find that quite horrifying. That
Yeah,
and
half the people
yeah, and I guess that there's a lot of things wrong with this, and a lot of things that perhaps we don't necessarily agree with, and but there may be some things in there that we do agree with, kind of thing, But at the end of the day, as we're coming out of these restrictions as well, it's things that will begin to get easier, hopefully, and the kind of the numbers will go down and people will be able to kind of go about their business again.
And it feels like those measures were written on like a premise that things were going to get much, much worse.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've, we've fortunately not gone to that level of catastrophe, where social workers were being seconded in. We've not reached that. So there's a lot of them around care homes, but I think like things like no LAC review, looked after child review every 6 months, which does impact on adoption and specifically fostering, but also that social workers are just not coming out, and I think that I
worry about how long term that is as well, because yes, this is supposed to be under COVID-19, but how long is COVID-19 going to last for? It could be till the end of the year, it could be till the middle of next year, we just don't know, and that is a long time to keep something in place that actually doesn't suit young people.
Well, the statutory instrument is up for review. I think it's the 25th of September, but it can be continued by just a stroke of the pen by the Secretary of State, and you go. We'd much rather it was brought back to Parliament even at that point and said, does it still stand? Is it too drunk? Is it too is it too much freedom? Not enough freedom? Whatever. But so that's a concern, and that's kind of hovering around, and I see increasing numbers of people sort of on that. But the government have clearly got bigger fish to fry at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
Or they think they have. Probably have. Well, but
I'm not even commenting on your British government.
Your British government? You're still a UK citizen.
Yeah, I know, but it's just dear.
Well, the government. Let's not get drawn into the rocks of politics, shall we not?
I feel a tad embarrassment and almost near to panic attacks just watching the news headlines or the news.
Well, don't watch it. That's what I've been doing.
Well, do you know what? Compared to a couple of months ago, I'm watching very little news to the point now I'm like, what's the figures today? And then I get told I get them fed them into my ear by my 3 children who are obsessed with the news still.
Really?
I'm like, yeah. I wouldn't say obsessed, but they're certainly. I think this is the first thing they've had any interest in terms of news. Wow, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm the exact opposite. I think the 25th of March, I just stopped watching the news because I thought what I see makes no difference. And it was just causing anxiety. It was like a scab that I needed to pick off, watch the news every day.
That's why I've stopped watching it as well. Yeah.
So I've taken note. I've just literally sat in this room and done podcasts and things. Anyway. Right, well, I'm going to go because the night is young and I got things I could be doing.
Yeah, me too.
All right, well, look after yourself.
I don't know what, but there's things that I could be doing. So.
I'm sure you could be reordering your sock drawer or something exciting, couldn't you?
I could be. How do you know? Have you got cameras in my house again?
I can't possibly comment, but I might be looking at my new hat and taking selfies of it in different places.
God. Can you just not? Because, people don't need to see that stuff.
Oh, did you see that? Well, I did a Facebook Live this morning and then I watched it back when I got home and it was in the rain. I realised that I'd been drinking coffee and I had a little coffee on my moustache.
Dear.
I just looked like a tramp, basically, walking through fields.
Oh, after lockdown, that's what you look like anyway. So there you go.
It is for sure. Well, okay. Well, I'm going to go on that note, on that edifying thought. So look after yourself.
Yes. And
bon
you.
Jovi.
Have a good week. Anchovy.
Excellent. Bye.
Bye.